Christy, welcome back to my channel. Today I've got a card using the adorable Hello Bluebird Boo Crew stamp set. So I've stamped my images out on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. So I'm starting with the little girl's skin, and for that I'm using E00, E11, and E13. Started with the E13 and laid in some shadow on underneath her hairline, also on the backs of her hands and the backs of her ankles, and I also did a little shadow around her nose. I blended that out with the E11 and then finished with the E00. I forgot to do her neck, so I went back and did that with the darkest two shades. And then for the boy, I wanted his skin to be just slightly lighter, so I took away the E13 and added in the E000. So I'm going to do my shadows for him with the E11 and blend that out with the E00, and then I'll use the E000 as my lightest. So very similar skin tones, but the little girl is just slightly darker, as you'll be able to see once I finish them up. I did also add a little shadow around his nose, and then I will take R11 and R20 and give them both some rosy cheeks, just by doing a little oval shape on the cheek area with the R20 and then tracing around the edge of that with the R11. Then I'm going to move on to the girl's hair, and I wanted her to be a redhead. So I'm going to use YR12, YR14, and E15. I'm using the YR12 first to kind of lay in where I want my shadows to go. There's not a ton of hair showing, so I have to be very careful to use the tip of my marker and lay down the smallest bit of color possible so that I can squeeze in all three shades and make sure that I get some nice variation there. So I built up that color all the way to the E15, and now I'm going to work my way back down with the YR14, saving a few little places that I left white to come back to the YR12. And then I can assess that from there and see if I need to add any more darkness. I did do a second layer off screen. And then I took away the E15 and added in the YR18 to do the little pumpkin treat container. I'm going to have the dog holding this later on in the card, so I put my shadows on the right hand side because the dog's body would be casting a shadow there, and blended toward the left, and also added in YR04 to just brighten it up and also fill in the inside. And then I added a bit of that YR04 to the two leaves. Now I'm going to move on to the boy's hair, and for that I'm going to use E50, E51, E53, and E55. I'm going for a blonde with this combo, but you can easily build this up into a light brown hair color just by adding more of the darker two shades. So I started with the E50 and kind of laid in some shadowed areas, did some little streaks and some feathery motions to indicate the different areas of his hair, give it a little texture, and then I darkened that up with the E51 and then the E53, and then I went back down to my E51 and the E50 to just blend that all out and see how I was liking it so far. And then I decided I wanted a bit more depth, so I did bring in that E55, but again, just using the very tip of that marker, adding it very sparingly just to make sure that I have, you know, some of those low lights in there, and then went over that with the E50 one more time. Then I'm going to use the E55 and the E57 to color in the broom handle. I used the E57 down at the bottom and then cast a little shadow right above her hand, and then blended that out with the E55, just making sure that everything is nicely blended there. And then I'm going to move on to the bottom of the broom, and I'm using Y26, Y28, and Y32. I used the Y32 first. I kind of tackled it like I do hair and started with the lighter color and then built up and added a little bit of streakiness for that texture, and then just worked my way back down in the reverse once again. But it was still looking kind of flat for me. I did do a little extra layering with that Y28, but ultimately decided I needed that E55 once again to just add a bit more texture to it. So then I'm going to move on to the little girl's costume, and I wanted to do some non-traditional Halloween colors. So I decided to do her little witch hat in the E70s. They're kind of like a grayish. It's like a gray-brown mix. So I went with the really dark ones though. So I picked E71, E74, E77, and E79. Laid in some shadows on the right hand side and accentuated the little area where it's kind of bent toward the right with that E79 and blended out with the E77. Then I'm coming in with the E74 and bringing that even further toward the left side. Also adding a little bit of a shadow on the underside of the hat. And then I'll use the E71 and create a nice highlight. I did leave a little extra area there. I decided that I would pull in the E70 because she is going to be under a moon, and so I wanted that to be casting a nice highlight on the upturned part of her hat. So once I have that all filled in, I'm also going to color in her little top to match. So I'm going to go back to my E79 and lay in some more shadows. Again, mostly on the right hand side since she's facing toward the left, and anywhere where the fabric would be creased. Also put a shadow behind her hand where that's overlapping her body, and on her right shoulder because she's got that big hat on, and so I wanted that to be, you know, casting a deep shadow as well. So then I blended out with the E77 and then the E74. And it just brought that color again toward the left hand side. I wanted the highlight to be in the same place as it is on the hat, you know, on the part that would be tipped most toward the light. So then I used the E71 to blend that out most of the way, but I did save a little bit of room for that E70 on both sleeves and on her little tummy. I'm going to give her some striped tights, so I'm going to skip every other one and again go back to that E79, and I'm going to color her shoes to match as well, so I put that at the heel of the shoe. And then I'm going to skip over the E77 since it's such a small little area and go straight to the E74 for the mid-tone and blend that forward. And then I'm going to skip over the E71 and go straight to the E70 for the highlight. So these colors still blend pretty well this way. I think especially on a smaller area, you can get away with just the 3 shades. So just filled in the toe of her shoe with that E70 as well. And then for the rest of her outfit, I'm going to do kind of like a minty blue. Like I said, I wanted to do some non-traditional Halloween colors, so I decided to go with this combo, which is BG10, BG11, and BG53. So the BG53 I put back in the darkest area and then blended forward with the BG11 and then use the BG10 for the highlight. And I'm going to do the same for her little tutu. And I put the BG53 on the waistline, and then I also did little triangles to create some pleats in the skirt. And then I'll blend that out with the BG11 and save a little bit of room there also for the BG10 for the highlight. So you could certainly do it without those little triangle shapes, but I do think it helps the skirt just look like it has more movement, and it's a little bit of a stiffer fabric and has those nice deep pleats in it. So I did go back once everything was blended out and add the pleats back in because I felt like they got a little bit lost. And then I'll do a second layer with the BG11 as well, just to make sure that they're blended out a bit. And then I'll add a touch of that BG10 on the outer edges of those triangle shapes as well. And then for her little tights, I'm just going to use the BG10 and add a little bit of shading on the right hand side, so they'll kind of look like they're black and white striped. For the little boy's costume, I decided to go with some toner grays. I picked T1, T3, T5, and T7. So I'm starting with the T7 and doing some deep shadows on his costume because I do want it to look more black than gray. So I went a little bit heavy-handed with the darker shades. And then I'm going to begin to blend that out with the T5, just making sure to scrub over the edge of that T7 and kind of do little scribbly marks to break up that line so I don't get like a harsh delineation between the shades. And then I'm going to blend that out with the T3. So I didn't actually even use the T1 on his top. And I don't think I use it on his pants either, so I ended up not even using the T1 for this little outfit. I did the cuffs a little bit darker, so I went in with the T7 and blended out with the T5 and only left a tiny bit of room for the T3. So then I'm going to move down to his pants. I'm going to use the same shades, but I want them to look darker. So again, I'm being heavy-handed with that T7, putting a shadow under his shirt so that gets a little bit darker there as well. And I am going to do a second layer on his pants off screen just to make them just a shade darker. I didn't want anything to be too matchy-matchy. So again, I blended out with the T3, so I didn't end up using the T1 at all. So for his shoes, I wanted to see if I could add some details to them and make them look like a particular brand, which I don't even know if I can mention on YouTube because of copyright, but you can probably guess what they are. So I used the T9 as my darkest because I wanted them to be darker than his little outfit, and then blended out with the T7. And then I'm going to use the T5 for my highlight. I had the wrong cap on the wrong marker when I put them away, so it was actually the T3, I think. But I just realized what I did and went back to the T5 for the highlight. And then for his cape, I wanted to go with something that would be dusty and complement her outfit, but just be a different color that would be non-traditional. So I went with some purples, which purple is fine for Halloween, but this is like a dustier shade, so it's not your typical bright punch of purple that you see in Halloween colors normally. So I went with V91, V93, V95, and V99. Right now I'm doing the shadows with that V99, just kind of like outlining the different parts of, especially the parts that are like between his legs and on the other side of his body behind his little candy basket. And then I blended that out with the V95. And I'm making sure to really work over the edge of that V99 and get that broken down as well, so I don't get those harsh lines, because that V99 is quite a bit darker than the V95, even though they are next to each other on the Copic color chart. So then I'm going to use the V93 and mainly fill everything in. I think the only space that I didn't fill in was the top of his collar, and so I decided to just go back and use that. So again, I didn't end up using the V91, but sometimes you just don't know what you're going to use until you kind of see how it's going. I will use the V91 though on her little bag. I wanted that to kind of pull in some colors from his outfit, so I decided to do it in those purples. So I used all 3 shades that I used on his cape, but then I did save a little bit of room there for the V91 to finish that off. I also decided to give the dog a little purple collar, so I'm going to use the same shades on that. Just started with the V99 at the back of his head and blended forward with the V95 and then the V93. And I also threw a little bit of those shades to finish off the 2 falling leaves. And I finished those with that V91. I used that to kind of go over the other 2 shades and just make sure everything kind of blended together. Then for his little candy basket, I decided to make it like a little cauldron. So I wanted to use some different blacks than I'd done on his outfit because I didn't want it to be looking like it was made of fabric. So I used C3, C5, and C7, and put the shadow next to his leg where his body would be casting one. And then I'm going to use the C0 and C1 to shade in the little dog. I thought it would be fun to make him kind of look like a little ghost, even though he's not in costume. I thought it would just be fun to kind of give him like a little bright white body. And then I'll do his ears and the little patch around his eye with some of those darker grays. I did skip the C7 and jumped straight to the C5, blended that out with the C3 and finished with the C1, but it wasn't quite dark enough for me, so I did do a second layer again, starting with the C5 once again, and just blended everything out one more time, and I was much happier with that look. And I took my black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and just got it started over to the side so that the ink was flowing nicely. And I went over the eyes of the dog and my 2 cute little kids. And then I trimmed these images out with their matching dies. I wanted to do some similar shades on the background as I used in my coloring. So I'm starting with some Distress Oxide in Speckled Egg on a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock. And I'm doing a circular shape toward the top of the scene. I'm going to have a moon there later on, so this is going to be kind of like the glow that's surrounding the moon. So I'm doing just big sweeping motions because I know I want that to blend in with my next color, which is going to be Shaded Lilac. So for that one, I'm going to come in from the 2 sides and the bottom. I'm going to skip the top area because I want to keep that lighter speckled egg tone. But I'm going to lay that in pretty heavily on the sides because that is such a pale color. And I want to make sure that, you know, I get some nice bit of color on there so that it, you know, has a nice night sky looking background. So I'm going to keep sweeping that color on and making sure to blend over the edges, and then I'll go back to my speckled egg and just work over that transition area. And then once I'm happy with how that's going, I want to darken up the sky. So I'm going to bring in some Dusty Concord. So that Dusty Concord is going to really go well with the dustier shades that I used in my Copic coloring. So because this shade is so much darker, I'm making sure to go in with a much softer hand. I'm using a lot lighter pressure than I did on the other 2 shades so that I get a nice smooth blend. I mean, I will have to go back to the other shades to make sure everything is nice and smooth, but if I don't put down too many harsh lines, I won't have as much work to do to blend everything smoothly. So now I'm going back to that Shaded Lilac once again, just working my way back toward the center and to that speckled egg, which I will go back to, and just use what's left on the tool there. And then once I'm happy with that, I'm going to grab some of my Gansai Tambi Starry Colors, and I'm going to mix up some of this pearl shade and splatter that all over the background so it can kind of be like little stars in the distance. I'll set that aside to dry, and then I die cut another piece of Bristol using the moon shape from the full moon die set, and I'm going to blend on some squeezed lemonade and kind of create a nice glow on my moon. I'm going to put it a little bit heavier on one area and then a little bit lighter on the opposite area, just to create that glow like I said. And then because that is so bright, I'm going to come in with some antique linen and just kind of knock down the brightness so it fits with the dustier shades of the coloring and the background. I will also splatter on some of that starry colors to create the little craters in the moon, and I'm letting some larger droplets go on as well by just tapping a little bit closer to that moon so they can look like craters. Once that's dry, I'll begin to assemble my card by adding this background onto a piece of narwhal cardstock from Lawn Fawn that I've scored and folded to a standard size card. And then I'm going to glue the moon toward the top of the scene. I was just trying to figure out like which orientation I wanted it in. And then I'm going to add some more of that Barely Art Precision Craft Glue to the back and let that hang off the top of the scene. Once I have that where I want it, I will trim off the excess from the back. And I'm using my Cutter Bee Teflon coated scissors. These are my favorite scissors. I've had these from the very first day that I've started crafting, and they still work like brand new. So once I have my moon cut down, I'm going to add a frame, and I'm using the Spooky Scene frame, and I've die cut that out of some mermaid cardstock from Lawn Fawn. So again, I'll use my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue because it's got that super fine nozzle to get around that small little area, and I'll add that frame right over top on the scene. And then for the inner parts of that scene, I've die cut those out of some Storm Cloud cardstock from Lawn Fawn. So I'll add the grassy piece down first at the bottom, and then I'll take the two trees and add those to either side. They fit right into the little area there at the top of the grass, so they're really easy to figure out where they go. And then I'll just do the other side to kind of frame everything up, making sure to even glue down those tiny little branches so everything is pressed down nicely. And then I'm going to pop that into my MISTI so that I can stamp my sentiment. I'm going to use VersaFine Onyx Black ink so it will lay nicely over that Distress Oxide and also the splatter on the background. And I stamped Scare Up Some Fun. And then I'm going to open up that card base and stamp on the inside. I'm going to use a sentiment from Good Fright, and then another one of the cute kids from Boo Crew, and I'm stamping those in Lawn Fawn Hippo ink. And that ink is not a whole lot darker than the narwhal cardstock, but it is the darkest gray that I own. So I just stamped it down a whole bunch of times. I did the whole thing 3 times, and then I stamped the girl down a 4th time, just to make sure that she really stands out, because that ink does dry back a bit. And then I'm going to bring in my images, but before I add them, I actually decided that I wanted to add a bit of shading. So I'm going to grab a T5 marker, I believe, or maybe a T3, and I'm just going to add like a shadow at the top of the grass, and then I will blend that out with the T3. So I use the T5 first and then the T3. And then I also wanted to add a little bit of texture to the trees. So for that, I grabbed T7, and I'm just going to do a few little lines and swirls to give them a bit more texture so they're not quite so flat and they match the coloring just a little bit more. So I'm going to do that to both of the trees, and just quickly, it doesn't have to be too precise because it's just wood grain texture, so any little squiggles and lines are gonna look good there. And now I can add in my kids. So I'm going to start with the boy. So my little idea in my head was that the big brother is taking his little sister trick-or-treating, so he's kind of leading the pack right out in front. And I'll have the little girl kind of lagging behind a little bit, so she is going to go over on the right hand side. So those two are kind of framed by the trees, and then between them I'm going to add their little dog. So he's going to go right in that space underneath the moon between them. So I'm going to adhere him down. I'm not going to press his face down too hard yet because I want to add this little treat basket for him. So maybe some people are nice enough to put out some little doggy biscuits as well for him to collect. So that's going to look like it's in his mouth. And then I've got two little bats that I'm going to use to accent that sentiment. I put one over on the left and then one kind of down toward the bottom right. And then I've got my two leaves as well, so I'll put one on the right and the other one over on the left. So everything is really nice and balanced, which you guys all know that I love. To finish off the card, I decided to add a little bit of Stardust stickles. I thought, you know, Halloween is kind of a magical night, so it just made sense to have a little bit of glitter in the scene. I added some to her little witchy hat band and to her tutu, and I'm going to put it on both of the falling leaves. I put it on the dog's collar and on all of the little treat baskets or containers. And then I did decide to add just a little bit to the boy's costume. I didn't want him to have too much on there, but I did just have a little bit like in the deepest shadows of his cape. So there, I'm going to pick that up so you can see how that catches the light and give you another peek at the inside. I really hope you guys enjoyed this kind of non-traditional Halloween card. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Ring that notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. I post new ones every Monday and Friday. All of the products I used are listed and linked in the description bar below in case you want to pick up any for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing day. Bye-bye.